document, Center for Disease Control, Atlanta, Georgia. So I raised my hand again, only this time she ignored me. Now you know what's hard to ignore? A Baptist preacher in a high school assembly where they're talking about oral and anal sex and rectal sex and other kinds of sex, and a room full of students. But I'm persistent if I'm nothing else, so I just kept my hand up. Well, soon all the kids were networking. Who is that? That's Misty's dad. That's Richard's dad. Finally, in exasperation, she said, "Sir," a second time. I said, "Ma'am, I've read everything the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia has written on the subject of condoms, I think, and nowhere do they purport that they're that safe in even protecting against pregnancy. And ma'am, the AIDS virus is 1,000 times smaller than the sperm of a man." Well, she knew I had my facts. At this point, she began breaking out in red splotches, as people are prone to do when they're nervous. She looked around for some support, and another teacher in our in our school spoke up and said, "I've read the same statistic in a teen magazine." And boy, then the uproar began. Well, I knew this wasn't the time or place to try to correct all the problems, so I courteously sat down, but I had the presence of mind to record this whole conversation on a pocket recorder I'd carried to that assembly. The short story of a long story I've written about and has been written about and been the subject of documentaries since is that I confronted the school board about this high school assembly. I have confronted them with facts about AIDS. As an outcome of that, the principal was fired for other official reasons. I was asked to present the next high school assembly, and I brought a Spring Branch high school teacher over who also was an AIDS patient, but this one had repented of his sin, asked God to forgive, and told the truth to the kids about AIDS and the fact that there is no surviving that dread disease. You may prolong your life, but there's still no cure. The following Sunday, after all those things happened, I got up in the pulpit and I turned my people loose. I began encouraging them to run for public office. I began preaching about the calling of God's people to be salt and light in the public place. Before long, 4 of our people were elected to the school board, changed the direction of the school. 3 of our people were elected as city council, including one of those members who's now serving in Congress, who just took Ron Paul's old seat on the southeast side of Houston. Another congressman that we helped get elected back in the 90s and then re-elected this last election cycle. 2 congressmen out of the ministry of that church are now serving with Louis Gohmert and are committed conservatives. But the most important thing is, I discovered that God had called me to preach a whole gospel, including getting people involved in standing up for their values. America is standing on the edge of the abyss and about to slide over. The only hope for this country now is ordinary Americans like you giving up their time like you have and standing up and saying, as I did in writing, enough is enough. Say it with me, enough is enough. I've written several books, but there's one small book that you can have for whatever donation you give, as long as they last. It's entitled, Mixing Church and State God's Way. My request, you read it, then give it to your pastor, because it's all about God's men, God's pastors. I believe as the church goes, so goes America. But as the pastor goes, so goes the church. What we have right now in America is a preacher problem. And not until the men of God do as your next speaker has done in this city, not until men of God like we have in the pulpit of First Baptist Church of Dallas stand up and speak out, will we see this country restored. It is now or it is never. It is now or it is never.